Well, despite what President Trump wants, everybody counts this time around. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle now. And Bill, the Commerce Department under Wilbur Ross just announced that they are going to go ahead with the printing of the decennial census forms without including a question about citizenship. This, of course, had been the subject of a Supreme Court case where basically the Supreme Court said that the Trump administration could not prove that they had the proper motivations for adding the question to the census and basically put a hold on things. President Trump himself said that he was talking to his attorneys to find out whether there was any way to delay the census because the administration had repeatedly said the forms had to be started. They had to start printing them in early July, and it looks like they're going to print them without that question. Another crushing defeat for Donald Trump when it comes to issues of immigration. Is this going to affect his popularity among the base who largely elected him because they were concerned about illegal immigration?
Let me just stop right here and go back to this, something you mentioned in the beginning. What the hell difference does his motivation have to do with anything?
Well, you're going to have to ask the Supreme Court about that.
Yeah, well, I plan to. I have a lot of questions I'd like to ask them about the law. What the hell does the motivation of the president have anything to do with whether or not a question is on the census, regardless of what that question is? That is the most insane thing I have heard since.
And let me state it the way the
yesterday.
Huffington Post article states it. And I may have embellished a little bit beyond what the, of course, this is the paper of record, the Huffington Post says. They said that the Supreme Court temporarily blocked the administration from adding the question, saying that the administration did not provide adequate explanation for the addition. Now, other things I've read said that the court was...
Stop. Hold it right there. Adequate explanation for the addition. The census is called for in the Constitution, correct? It's called for once every 10 years in order to determine congressional representation. Is that a fair statement?
I think that would be accurate.
Okay, so these congressional districts, number of congressmen per district and all the rest of it, determines how many representatives they are, what their size, the representatives stay the same, but what the size of the district is, and so on. This affects the people who vote in elections. The people who vote in elections are American citizens. If you're not an American citizen, then you should not be able to vote in an American election, and your presence here has no bearing whatsoever on congressional reappointment. What's so tough about this?
Well, actually, what the civil rights and immigrants' rights groups say is that adding such a question to the census would not only keep us from getting an accurate count of people who are in the country but who are not citizens, but in fact, it would cause fewer people to respond who are citizens, because a lot of citizens who came originally from other countries during this generation have relatives, and in some cases even people living with them or nearby, and they would be concerned about answering these questions.
They'd be concerned if they were here legally?
Well, the people who are here legally would be concerned about doing the census because of their proximity and connections with people who are here illegally.
Well, I suppose that makes a certain kind of sense. So in order to make sure that the people who are, I'll just come out and say it, people who are harboring fugitives from the law, make sure that those people aren't offended or intimidated in any way, we're going to make sure that there is no restriction on whether or not your count in this country is a measure of your citizenship or not, if I understand that correctly. Now, I find it quite remarkable that the states that this is going to impact the most would be states like California, which is as blue as it gets, Texas, which is not, Florida, which is not, Arizona, which is not, New Mexico, which is not. When your entire political party's position is you don't have to be an American to vote in American elections, then at least the battle lines are clear. And if we had any kind of Republican leadership that had the fundamental essence of rhetoric down, the first thing we would do is on camera ask Nancy Pelosi and all the rest of them on camera, Can a person who is not an American citizen vote in an American election, yes or no?
Well, Bill, the roadblock here isn't Nancy Pelosi. The roadblock here is the majority Republican appointed Supreme Court.
Well, the Republican then let's just ditch that entire group of Republican appointed Supreme Court justices and get somebody who can read. Can we find somebody who can read? Is that a possibility? That's my minimum requirement now for a Supreme Court justice. Can you read and understand an English sentence, yes or no? And if the answer is no, then I don't care what your judicial background is. The census is there to measure the number of citizens in the country for congressional appropriations, apportionment. And that's it. And if you can't read that sentence, and if you don't have the fundamental logic to understand that, what are you doing on this court? So what are you doing as a judge of any kind?
Bill, do you not buy the assumption that people would be restrained or feel restrained from participating in the census if this question were included? Or do you think it just doesn't matter? Who cares if those people don't answer the census?
So, look, what we're doing again and again and again and again and again, this is the mantra of progressivism. It is the curse of the last 50 years. And that is this idea of punishing the innocent in order to protect the guilty. And if you're telling me that my right as an American citizen to have congressional representation appropriate to the rest of the American citizens that I share this country with, if you're telling me that that has to take a back seat to somebody who may or may not be a legal resident here or a citizen here who is reluctant to speak up because they are harboring illegal aliens here against the law, then I am sorry. If you have to make a decision between these two things, I'm going to go with the 320 million honest Americans and not with the microscopic number of people who may be intimidated by answering this question in terms of the number of citizens living in their home. And by the way, Scott, the whole argument is specious anyway. Let's just say that the case that they're laying out is true. I have a house. Let's say I'm renting a house. I'm a U.S. citizen. My wife is a U.S. citizen, but we have 3 people here illegally who are not U.S. citizens. Somebody knocks on my door. How many U.S. citizens live in this residence? 2. Okay. Who is going to come around and check to make sure that there are not 5 people living there? How is that going to happen? At what point in the entire process does that happen?
Well, Bill, I think these people come from some countries where they may have legitimate concerns that the government would be much more intrusive in their lives than we experience here in the United States.
Our government?
No, what I'm saying is that they come from other countries that are more oppressive than the United States government is. They may have had the experience of having the government all up in their grill. And
great. Then we can consider this a Citizenship 101 learning lesson. Welcome to the land of the free. I am a general, as you know, as you are in your real life, not in your alter ego as mild-mannered progressive reporter Scott Ott. But this would be an excellent example for them to get used to what life in America is about. I am generally speaking absolutely against any kind of intrusion into people's private lives, and this is one of the very few exceptions I can think of, only because it is necessary to the functioning of the republic. And it is not, by the way, an unreasonable thing to do every 10 years to ask people how many people they have in their household.
This clearly is a delineation between conservatives and what are called liberals these days, or from progressives and conservatives. I mean, after all, the ACLU has a voting rights project, and a spokesman for the ACLU voting rights project, Dale Ho, says that in light of the Supreme Court's decision and now the Trump administration's action of printing these census forms without the citizenship question, he says everyone in America counts in the census, and today's decision means we all will. Why do you think there is such a sharp line between the way the ACLU sees it and the way you see it?
This is the simplest question that I've ever been asked on this show. The reason that Democrats are in favor of illegal aliens voting in American elections is because illegal aliens will come here to do the jobs that Americans won't do, and that is vote Democrat. And that's the only reason. That's the only reason. It's the only thing that's got anything to do with it. And what I find especially appalling about this, Scott, is that of all the questions on the census form This is about the only one I can think of that actually needs to be there for legal reasons. I don't think you need to know the person's race, their religion, none of it. I think age might conceivably be important because that also affects to some degree how voting spreads out. But I think that if you told me that the census wasn't going to include any boxes on your race, on your religion, ethnic background, none of it, I'd be over the moon delighted. The only thing that does need to be on there is whether or not you're a citizen. In other words, how many citizens you have in the house.
Well, your sarcastic comment about how that these immigrants will do things that Americans won't do, which is vote Democrat, is exactly why this case exists. It's exactly why there's resistance to the citizenship question, because people who are immigrants' rights attorneys and activists believe that Republicans want that question on there to suppress Democratic votes. And why is that any better or worse than what you're saying?
We want the question there to suppress the votes of people who are not legally allowed to vote in this country. It doesn't have anything to do with where they come from or what color they are, any of that nonsense. We want the vote to be determined by American citizens. The definition of a country. That's the definition of a country, is who controls the government and is there a border? Otherwise, it's just a patch of land. And the destruction of America as a country is in the interest of the Democrats. And the preservation of America as a country is in the interest of the Republicans. Pretty simple, really. So why don't we just come out and have them say it? Why is there a Republican, including Donald Trump, who does not have the common sense to simply say to top Democratic leaders at every chance he gets to meet them and get it on camera, should elections be determined by U.S. citizens only, yes or no? Well, the rights of immigrants, I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you whether or not American citizens have the right to determine their own future without the influence of people who are not American citizens. That's what I'm asking you. Which one is it? And make them make a commitment. And if they won't commit, then that's an answer. Okay? So this whole thing is just part of the ongoing destruction of not just of conservative principles, the destruction of law. That's what this is all about, Scotty. It's about the destruction of the rule of law, so that the law, if it favors the progressives, is then rigidly enforced and is needless to say, all of the traditions of America bound deeply into it. But if it's something that doesn't benefit them politically, then it's something that's just chucked away. And this is the most fundamental issue there is about elections. You want free and fair elections, is what they claim they want, free and fair elections. Free and fair elections are comprised of votes of citizens. And let me say one more thing about this. When they say that, well, we're just concerned that every vote counts. Well, I'm an American citizen and I vote in elections. If somebody behind me in the line is not an American citizen and they vote in that election and their votes cancel my vote has been stolen, my vote has been suppressed. That's whose vote's been stolen and that's whose vote's been suppressed. And why we do not have the fundamental rhetorical abilities to make this case is beyond my imagining. I guess that's why the show is here. So you want to talk about voter suppression? That's great. The people who have a right to vote in this country are American citizens. And if your case is that immigrants should be allowed to vote, then their votes are stealing my vote. They are taking my vote away from me. And I have a right to vote, and they don't.
Well, let's look at the political implications of this as my final question for you. As I mentioned earlier, the president had repeatedly stated publicly that he was talking to attorneys to figure out whether the census could be delayed until this case was worked out so that the question could be included. President Trump, who came in as a relatively strong character, a business leader, the great negotiator, has once again failed to get something that he definitely wanted on the issue that he placed above all other issues during his campaign. How do you think this plays out as he tries to rally the base to put him back in office? Censi only come once every 10 years. He's not going to get another crack at this.
Well, first of all, if you want my personal opinion as a likely Republican voter, I don't hold this against Donald Trump. What do you want me to say about that? Is that a betrayal of Trump because the Supreme Court overruled him? It's a betrayal of the Supreme Court. has no business doing this anyway. Not only does it have no business doing it anyway, the Supreme Court should have been able to take a preliminary scan at the Constitution and say, hey, wait a minute, that question is missing. That question needs to be in there because this is how we determine our representation in this so-called republic. Now, to whether or not this is going to hurt Donald Trump in the election, it's not going to hurt him with me. On the contrary, I would make this a freaking torch issue. I would make it an absolute torch issue. I would stand there in the debates with the Democratic challenger, and I would say your party made sure that there would be a box, that there would be no indication on the census as to whether or not this person was a citizen. You wanted the racial information, you wanted the background and all the ethnicities so you can continue your race war in America. We thought all of that was irrelevant. We thought that a person is a person. The only thing that matters is it a citizen, yes or no? But you got your way. So now we made sure that congressional districts are apportioned by the number of people living there. And if you happen to have an extremely large percentage of illegal aliens, then guess what? Too bad for you. Too bad for you. Your votes are canceled. Your American rights have been taken away by these Democrats who are in this mode because this is the only way they can win elections. So that's what I would do, and that's what I would say, and I would never drop it. I would run it into the ground until it was red and sticky. I would never stop talking about this, ever. And I would put them on the spot. I would make them on national television tell the American people, are you in favor of illegal immigrants voting in this country, or are you in favor of citizens voting in this country? Make up your mind and tell the American people which one you believe in. And once they say that on television, then it's pretty simple after that. If they say, no, we think only citizens should vote, great. From that point on, we've got them. If they say no, anybody should be able to vote, then at the very least, those of us who still are citizens of this country, who still have some determination of the government of this country, have a right to know that. We have an absolute right to know that.
Working for the members who provide the financing for this enterprise, Bill Whittle now comes to you 5 times a week thanks to their generosity and goes out to the world, frankly. We have members who pay anywhere from $9.95 a month to $49.95 a month, although some people pay annually. And those people who pay the greater amounts don't get any greater benefits other than the knowledge that they are providing essentially 5 memberships. They are providing for other people who are unable or so far unwilling to do so. If you've been reluctant so far, why don't you give it a try? A 30-day risk-free trial, money-back guarantee. If you don't think it's worth more than you paid for it, then just write us and we'll cheerfully give you a refund and then welcome you back when you realize what a horrible decision you've made. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible. For Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thank you.